أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العظيم.
Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this unique panel discussion on a topic we often take for granted. Population remains the single most important indicator for socio-economic development, as well as a crucial concept to determine future policy direction. Well, today we're going to bring this issue to the forefront and have a very, very eye-opening dialogue and discussion in the form of a panel discussion today. Thank you, all of you, for being here. Now, although I do have the honor of hosting this event, I'm not the expert. Far from it. I'm here to learn and understand just like all of you. Today you'll hear from the experts, from the real experts about the issues we've not paid quite enough attention to. We'll spend an hour in conversation with three experts, whereby also allowing you, my fellow audience, to pose any questions that you might have about this very, very pertinent issue. Now, that's all to come. But before we get into this, there are some vital precursors we have to have, just so that you're well aware of the issue that we're talking about. Now, we'll begin with a short animated introduction of the report by Professor May on the Maldives population dynamics, which I'm sure you'll find very interesting because it will also lead the conversation that we're going to have today. So without further ado, I'm going to give you this short presentation. We wanted you to actually understand the concepts a little more. That's why we're playing it a second time. Sorry for those technical issues, but, that happens. Well, next on the agenda is the launching of the report. So may I very humbly request the Honourable Ministers of Education and Finance to do the honours, please. And Alan as well. Thank you, Honourable Ministers. Thank you, Alan. Now, I hope all of you do have some time to read that report. It's very interesting, and it tells you a lot about the population dynamics and sort of the conversation that we're going to have today. Next on the agenda is a short presentation by the author of this report, and it will allow you to understand some of the key aspects of this report. And the report was prepared by Professor John F. May. If I may just give a small introduction. Professor John May, a US and Belgian national, is a specialist on population policies. He's currently a visiting scholar at the Population Reference Bureau in Washington, D.C., and an adjunct professor of demography at Georgetown University. He was a lead demographer at the World Bank for 15 years, and he has worked for the United Nations as well as for the US consulting firm Futures Group International. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Professor John May.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for these nice words. This is my report, but to some extent only, because I received a lot of support from the National Bureau of Statistics, which I would like to thank here, because they provided the data. They have done the census in 2014, and they have been tremendous colleagues, so thank you. What I'm going to do is to explain briefly the main feature of the demography of Maldives, also to explain the change in the age structure, the potential for capturing a first demographic dividend, and then I will outline the main conclusion of the report. You will have plenty of time to read the reports in due time. So, the demography of Maldives is quite fascinating. We saw that we have about 400,000 people here in this country, scattered over 1,200 islands. 187 are inhabited, 111 resort islands. And the rate of growth is about 2% per year, doubling time of the population 36 years. But what's the fascinating point is that the country has completed its demographic transition. And that's when, as I will show in a few minutes, the death rates and the birth rates, very high level, are going down and reaching a new equilibrium at a low level. The total fertility rate, the average number of children per woman, is 2.5, quite low. Very high population densities, 1,300 people at least per square kilometer, but also a young population. 48% roughly of the all Maldivian residents are below age 25, so it's a young population. The population is really scattered, as I said, about 250,000 people living on 187 islands. I mentioned the resort islands, and 38% of that population, however, resides in the administrative islands of Malé. That's a number of islands around the capital city. And only 3 atolls have more than 15,000 people. Looking at the future, the population projections, now we are about 400,000 people. We might get to about 500,000, maybe a bit more, by year 2050. But that will depend, of course, on fertility and how it's going to evolve. Now, this graph is important because it shows the crude birth rates on the top and the crude death rates at the bottom. And you see that over the last half century or even 65 years, these rates have decreased and bringing the demographic transition. Now we are at this stage of the process where the country is going still to grow in terms of population, but grow at a slower pace. And also there is another issue cropping up, which is population aging. As soon as you reduce fertility, population is aging. And so what's needed to be done is to prepare for that in the future. Here you have the population pyramid of Maldives, and this is the Maldivian population. I will show in the next slides the same graph, but with the foreigners added. And what we see is that we have a lot of people in the active age group, the active adults, the labor force, the productive people. And these people have less dependence at the bottom of the pyramid. And that's when this relationship between the active adults and the young dependents changes, that you can start to capture demographic dividends. The next slide is on the same pyramid, but you see that you have more people, especially on the left, and these are the foreigners who are coming to work here, mostly in the tourist industry, and they come from Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, but also some other countries like the Philippines. And roughly there are 67,000 people, foreigner people in this country. That's about 16% of the Maldivian population. I keep going. And as I said, there is a potential to capture a first demographic dividend. What is the demographic dividend? Some people told me that when they meet two demographers, there is a demographic dividend, but that's not exactly the case. The demographic dividend is a bit different. It's a concept of economic demography. And it's an economic surplus which is triggered by a relative increase in the active population. So you have more people in the active population. Those people are working, they are producing, and they have less young dependents because fertility has come down. So what you see is in the population pyramid, you have a rectangular shape at the bottom of the pyramid because you have less young dependents. You have relatively more people in the active population. There are a lot of discussions in the academic community when actually a demographic dividend will present itself, and there is a kind of a consensus to say that you need to have one active adult for only half a young dependent. And that's about the ratio we are now in the Maldives. So the Maldives has done its demographic transition, has opened this demographic window of opportunity, and has reached this kind of ideal ratio between active adults and the young dependents. One adult for half a dependent. If you don't want to cut the dependents in two, you can say two adults for one dependent. And the point here is that this demographic window of opportunity, which has opened in this country, is limited in time. It's not going to be there forever because the population will gradually start to become older and start to age. So this window of opportunity is limited in time, and it's roughly a window of about 40 to 50 years. The demographic dividend, and this is a famous graph done by the Population Reference Bureau, needs to bring together a lot of good policies. And you see on the left coggle is a population structure, but you need to have the health, education, the governance, the economy working together, and then eventually you can capture what we called a first demographic dividend. Why I am using the word first demographic dividend? Because when the population will work, will have savings, investment, there will be a second demographic dividend in the next few decades. So you see that it's quite complex and needs a lot of policies to build human capital, education, the most important sector, probably, health, extremely important, housing, and the development of skills which would match the needs of the economy. When I did this work with the NBS, we found together that there are three major policy challenges in this country. One is to improve the youth, human capital, reproductive health outcomes, and gender equality. And this is really at the heart of UNFPA's mandate, but also embedded in many policies that has been prepared in this country. And the second challenge is to capture the first demographic dividends, as I have mentioned. And these are linked because you cannot capture the first demographic dividend unless you have educated, good health, and skillful population, especially a young population. And finally, the last major issue is to manage internal and international migrations. We have a number of people here from other countries working in this country, but we have also movement among the islands, and more than 50% of all Maldivians have moved one island at least once in their life. It's quite amazing, the movement between the islands. And finally, last but not least, we need to look at the linkages and the cost-cutting issues between these three policy challenges, but also keep in mind that there is the challenge of climate change taking place, and that has to be mitigated as well with far-reaching policies. And to conclude what we proposed in the report, as you will see, there are 4 different policy pathways to go and to move forward. One would be to bring population issues within the overall development strategies. And this has been done to some extent, but probably could be done further, could be done in an enhanced way. The second is to strengthen the institutional setting to address population issues. The third one is to expand population and development research, including the teaching of demography, and we are going to have a talk with the University of Maldives to discuss that in particular. And finally, to enhance the advocacy on population and development issues, and this report is part and parcel of this process to try to disseminate those notions. A lot of people are not fully aware of the importance of population issues, but that may be the fault of demographers because they have not been able to make their science simple enough to be understood. And I think this report tried to strike a balance between the evidence-based research and the solid data provided by the NBS, but also to try to craft it in a language that can be understood by everybody in this country. So that's it, and I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor May. And now we move on to the actual panel discussion. And let me invite the panelists up onto the stage. Firstly, we have the UNFPA Country Director for the Maldives, Mr. Alan Sibonella. He's a national of Luxembourg and currently serves as the UNFPA representative in Sri Lanka and as the Country Director for the Maldives. Alan has a proven track record of 20 years in change leadership and management excellence throughout postings in Kenya, Afghanistan, Cameroon, and at the UNFPA headquarters. In Sri Lanka, he recently conceptualized and pioneered 3 innovative organizational change initiatives: the Policy Engagement Framework, the Social Change Entrepreneurship Initiative, and the UN's Virtuous Continuum of Change. In Sri Lanka, Alan is the chair of the National Forum Against Gender-Based Violence, the United Nations Gender Theme Group, and the United Nations Communications Group. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Mr. Alan Sibonella. And next on the panel, we have Ms. Aishat Shahuda, the Chief Statistician, the National Bureau of Statistics. Ms. Shahuda is currently the Chief Statistician of the National Bureau of Statistics in the Maldives. She has over 25 years of practical experience in the field of statistics. She was the officer in charge of the planning and management of the Census 2014 in Maldives. She's been involved in all the censuses carried out in the country since 1990 and played an instrumental role in engendering the Census 2006. She led the process of the planning and implementation of major household surveys in the country, such as the Household Income and Expenditure Surveys and Economic Surveys. Ms. Shahuda has a lot of knowledge and experience in the area of economic statistics, particularly in the areas of national accounts and price statistics. She has a master's degree in economics from the University of Wollongong in Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Aishat Shahuda. And last but not the least, we have Professor John F. May, and as I introduced earlier, is a Belgian national, is a specialist in population policies, is currently a visiting scholar at the Population Reference Bureau, Washington, D.C., and adjunct professor of demography at Georgetown University. He was a lead demographer at the World Bank for 15 years and has worked for the United Nations as well as for the US consulting firm Futures Group International. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Professor John F. May. apologies, ladies and gentlemen, as we get all geared up for the presentation. Might take a little while, but we're going to get started in a few. Now, before we actually go into the real stuff of the panel discussion, let me also say that you at the audience can ask questions to our distinguished panel. And you can ask questions at any time, any point of time. We're just going to do this very informally. We're going to I'll be asking some questions, but we're hoping that you have more questions than me. You're all welcome to ask questions. I think we also have a Twitter hashtag to pose questions to the panelists. So we hope that you're not going to use that. We hope you will be asking questions in person, so that we can actually hear from you. And we're also being joined by web streaming from some of the atolls, so we're sort of being heard and seen all over the country, which is great. So thank you once again for being here and allowing all of us to understand a bit about the population dynamics. And I think when you were talking earlier, Professor May, about the discourse that we need to have in terms of allowing people to understand better what this population dynamic means, and I think we're doing exactly that by having this discussion. Now, before I go into individual questions, let me just give each one of you an opportunity to briefly just make an opening statement, if you will, about the discussions we're having today and your take on it. We'll start with you, Alan.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I almost feel like I'm in the presidential debates in some of the countries, so making an opening statement. My opening statement is very simple. Today is World Population Day, and the theme of the World Population Day this year is invest in teenage girls. I think it's very important that we remind ourselves that in many countries in the world, a teenage girl, when you reach puberty, it is not a time for that girl to have full potential, to have access to education, access to her reproductive rights. Many of them are married, many of them are falling pregnant without that they wish so, and I think we believe in the United Nations that you take out a huge chunk of the world's innovation, of its determination and commitment for the betterment of society when you deprive young women and young teenage girls of their rights to choose if and when they should get married and if and when they should be pregnant. And the second thing I'd like to say is that all of this discussion here is just the beginning, or it's just an element of a larger process of dialogue and engagement on issues that are of importance. And demography is one of the issues that is of importance for the socioeconomic development of this country. So it's not just us here as demographers or statisticians or geographers talking about issues, but it's about having a new way of bringing people together from all walks of life, from all genders, although I see there's a clear gender imbalance in this room, and also the intergenerational dimension, right? That we bring all of that together and really think through what it means in terms of Maldives' trajectory of socioeconomic development. How does demography shape that? And I think that's very important. So this is just the beginning of a series of dialogues and of interactions that we will be having in the future.
Thank you very much, Alan. Shahda?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy and honored that we are able to have this dialogue, and then this is a result of a coordinated joint exercise with NBS and the UNFPA, and with as our professor here. So actually NBS is a statistical agency, so our main role is to collect the data. So we have been conducting these censuses over time. So now I think it's time that we go to another level where we are able to show people on how they should be using statistics and statistics is valued, the more it gets used. So whatever we are doing on a regular frequency, it's very important that we have censuses on a frequent basis, on a regular basis. So like last time we had a 8-year gap for the censuses. And still, I think in our country, it's only through the census that we are able to show the growth rates, the congestion and the pull factors that we are having towards Malé. Because most of the information that we have is still on the register population. So it's only through the census we are able to see how many people are actually living in the different islands of the country. And this time, I think it's like very good that we were able to capture even although we were under enumerating, we were able to try and look at the foreign population that are in the country. So I think that is what I would like to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor May.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say the purpose of all these exercise and these booklets is to start a new conversation on population and development issues. There are many data in this country, and I think the history of census taking goes back to 1911, so it's quite impressive number of censuses. The vital registration data are also quite good quality. There is a new demographic and health surveys being planned and start to be on the field later this year, and we have the results in 2017. So what struck me when I came here for the first time in January, this is a dream destination. You know, my colleagues were saying, well, how come did you manage to find a mission to go to the Maldives? You know, this is absolutely disgusting because we would like to go too. No, this is a dream destination. It's world famous for the nature and the sea and all the riches of this country. But when you look at the demography, it's really amazing story. The country went through a demographic transition, has gone through an economic boom. It's quite incredible. It's a middle income country. There are a lot of indicators which are pretty good, and I even mentioned, I think in the report, there are modern health and demographic indicators to a large extent. Now, this, however, brings some challenges. As I said, the population will inevitably start to age, so there will be population aging, and so we have to plan for the future. And here is the trouble, because demographers and scientists and sociologists, and they look at 20, 30, 40 years down the road, but the political leadership is very much busy with what's going to happen in the next year or the next election or whatever. And we have this problem everywhere around the world. You know, the colliding time scale between the demographers, the scientists, and also the policymakers, because they have a lot of things they have to deal with urgently. They cannot always take the time to think about 20, 30 years down the road. So what we try to do here in this report is to try to bring some based evidence and to try to explain in a simple language how some policies actually could be taken today and they will have an impact in the long term. So that's would be a way, if you will, to try to bring together the realm of the policymakers and the scientists. And last but not least, we also would like to see more analytical work. There will be other data coming. The NBS is posting on its website, and I urge you to visit the website of NBS. Great resource. We'll post more report. There is another report coming up soon on the youth in Maldives. So there is a large body of data, evidence that can be put to the crafting of the public policies that will help the country in the next 3-4 decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor May. Now, Alan, when you started your introduction, you talked about the importance of empowering women and girls and gender equality. As it's also the theme of the World Population Day this year. In your opinion and in your experience working in many countries, what would you say are the key challenges in terms of gender equality in this country?
I think the first part of my answer is that in a middle-income country, it's not that you don't have policies in place. It's not that you don't have the capacity to conceptualize policies. It's about the accountability of those who implement the policies. It's about the quality of policies, and it's about the rights-based equity of policies, that everyone is given a fair chance. And here comes the issue. We do believe that it is that gender inequality manifests itself too much in Maldives, in all spheres of life. But that doesn't mean that we are all running around with banners and t-shirts screaming for more power to women, because the second aspect of my answer is that we have to be extremely culturally sensitive to our program approaches. Now, when you look at gender-based violence or violence against women at home or in the workplace or in the public spheres, there are certain elements that we are not very satisfied with. So whether it's the health response to gender-based violence, whether it's including gender issues, respect between men and women in the school curriculum, in life skills education, in education of comprehensive reproductive health at the primary school level. These are some of the real issues that we have to not forget, I would say. So I repeat myself, in a middle-income country, it is always about the accountability, the equity, and the quality of existing policies, and making sure that you get people engaged, informed about what the policies are about, and then tell their own story and contribute to the well-being and to the development of their own country. And that's where the social change dimension comes in, and that's where the demographic dividend currently comes in, because you have this large cohort of young people. It's 47%, ladies and gentlemen, of the population of Maldives is less than 25 years old. You have a strong sex ratio, which is, I think almost, sorry?
103.
You see that's
Yes.
exactly, which means that you have more women, men than women. So there is this, what we see here, there is this gender imbalance, which is, I think, very important, and it's a very important factor.
And now, talking about what you just mentioned about the youth population, which is almost 47.5%. And we certainly have a lot of young people in the crowd today, and I think almost 90% or more in the crowd are young people, including you, yes, Anissa. So firstly, if you have any questions, not just the young people, but those who are young at heart as well. If you have any questions that you'd like to pose to the panel, are there any questions that are ready? Please raise your hands if you have. I think we have one question from over there. Please state your name and maybe where you work for the record.
Yeah, I'm Mohammed. I work here as a lecturer. My question is, have you identified the reasons why our fertility rate is falling? Why people are not having children like before? We know the numbers, but have you actually identified the reasons behind it?
Professor Allen.
So thank you for
Sorry.
the question. It's quite an interesting question, actually, because it's quite surprising that the level of fertility is so low in this country. And I think there are some reasons for that. probably the attitudes towards reproduction have been changing in this country over the past 20, 30 years. Demographers use the concept of ideational change, the change of ideas and conception and attitudes vis-a-vis reproduction. And I think there is a clear phenomenon here of ideational change explaining fertility. There might be some other causes of this low fertility, which I say is 3.5 children per woman on an average. As you know, the replacement level would be about 2.1, 2.2 children per woman, so you would replace the generations. So Maldives is slightly above replacement level fertility. But there might be some other explanations. One is a higher level of education, especially of the young women. And so, you know, we have to face it as male. The reproductive decisions are made by females. You know, the men are just used to help a little bit, but the decision is made by the females. I think that's quite clear all over the world. And when the women start to have a higher level of education, they have higher aspiration, and you know, then they say, well, maybe 2 is better than too many. And so they decided to have less children. But there are probably other explanations as well. Economic, the labor force participation of women, that's one thing. Probably there might be some space issues, especially in Malé. If you live in a small apartment, you cannot have a very large family as if you live on an outer island. So I think there are many, many dimensions to this. And it's not quite clear, actually, and that might require some additional research. But the fact is that now fertility is very low, and we have to take it from there. You know, we are not going back probably to high levels of fertility. If you look at the situation of China, where the one-child policy was changed for a two-children policy, I would say, in 2015, that doesn't mean that the Chinese couple will go back to higher fertility, because the attitudes and the way of living have changed quite tremendously. And I think the same is probably going to happen in this country in the future, is that fertility may go up a little bit, but not tremendously high, and will remain at about the same level, maybe decrease a little bit, and as we have seen in many other countries. And remember, it's much easier to bring fertility down than to bring it up. Look at the European countries. We are trying to have more babies, and you know, it's very difficult. I think in Russia, they have even enacted their own population day, and they try to give a big sum of money to the couple who would have a child born on that day, etc., etc. And fertility is going up a little bit, but not that much. But they are well below replacement now in Russia. I think there it's about 1.6 children per woman. So I think kind of a low regime fertility is going to be here for a long time. It might change a little bit, but not much. That's my assumption. And it's probably related, as I say, to a vast array of different causes, including, I think, one is very important, I think, the place of women in the society, the gender equality, and I think that's a dimension on which the UNFPA mandate is really focusing and helping the government, and in many, many ways, to unleash the potential of the women through education, empowerment, assertiveness, participation in the labor force, is a tremendous, not only social change, but also economic change. And I think that we should keep in mind that the women have a huge role to play. And some countries, if you look at Japan, for instance, I think that's one of their problems. The women, Japanese women, do not participate enough in the economy. And they would be better off if we really embarked on these paths of development, economic assertiveness, and empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. As you can see, we have quite a passionate panel on today. And Alan, would you like to add something?
I would like to. Is the microphone working? Yes. Okay. I'd like to add a couple of things to this. First of all, I agree with what the professor said. And in the report, I think there are some very interesting findings in terms of the labor force participation and the need for good education, specialized education, and so forth when it comes to the participation of women in the economic development. And it's interesting because it is an economic model that from the outside looks mainly at, looks like it's based on tourism and so forth. So I think that's very important because it's coupled with the accessibility issue, it's coupled with the population distribution as well. But to go back to the question of fertility, I'm based in Sri Lanka where we are actually seeing now an increase of fertility, which is due to security and I think comfort and a good healthcare system and so forth. But then at UNFPA and at the UN, we're also here to talk about the issues that normally are not talked about. So when it comes to Maldives, let me just say that yes, there is low fertility, but there is also very low contraceptive prevalence. And that's a very interesting phenomenon because at the same time there is 1/3 of women who would like to have access to family planning services, but who don't have it, right? So these are some of the issues that we also need to put on the table and talk about.
Absolutely. Now, shifting the topic slightly, but the information, the crucial information that we're talking about today is a result of the census. But often we, in the Maldives have viewed census primarily as a means of just understanding how many people are living in this country. But, and they're not aware of the complexities of what the census data can do and how important it is for the overall developmental process. So, Shahda, as a statistician and someone who's been involved in the census process for a very long time, what would you say is the importance of the census and gathering statistics for the overall development process?
I would like to thank you for the question. I think that is one of the key indicator that we are able to get what is happening to the population through the censuses. And although it is more of a head count that we used to do in the earlier days, in the early at the beginning of the census taking, but now we are including quite a lot of questions on socio-economic aspects and housing also. So still I would like to say that even if we talk about the economic activities, employment related information, census is still one of the key sources of information, and the advantages is that it is at the island level. So even if we do other surveys or administrative information, we don't have that type of information at the most basic level. So it's at the island. For island planning you can use it, and then what we have tried to do at the NBS is just to provide the basic information on all the data that was collected. So some of the publications we have on education and then fertility, and economic activity, and we still have more publications that we are producing more on the housing part. But we have all the micro data that we have collected in the census. So for the data research purposes, like it was used by a professor here for his analysis, and then from the National Bureau of Statistics. So like I think we need to do more analysis, more research. So it's like I would like to like say that we encourage the use of the census data by the other like the young people and everybody in the planning, so that they can have evidence-based decision making based on the census data. So that is the.
And would you care to comment on the complementary process of gathering those statistics and utilizing that in the policy making process? Would you comment on that? I mean,
I would like to say that although we would like to have data used much more than right now, we still see that we need to educate more. Statistical literacy is also one factor that that is still. I mean, although we also have a responsibility on that from the National Bureau of Statistics, still at the policy making level, I think still it's not used as it should be. So there's a lot of data still, but unless we like the policy makers still, I think we have to have a confidence in using the data, and then still people are afraid a little bit on data usage, whether they might be using it wrongly. So there's all this, I think, at the literacy and the even at the policy makers level on the use of these statistics right now.
Professor May, one of the key points that you've talked about in your presentation as well has been the demographic dividend, and you mentioned in the report that that in itself is not going to be something that would change the country for the better, but there needs to be policies that come with it to reorient policies based on that dividend. And if I may just draw an analogy from the kind of complicated books that I read, it's not the goose that lays golden eggs, but it's more like the beanstalk Jack finds outside of his house, nothing in itself unless you're willing to climb the heights and get the goose. Would you care to comment on what you mean when you say that we need to focus on that demographic dividend in order to reap the benefits of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I would like to go back a little bit on the origin of this demographic dividend concept. Economists were looking at the situation of East Asian countries, and there was the Asian miracle. And when looking at the data, they were forced to take into account the demographic change. And what happened is that those countries in East Asia, they went through a very rapid fertility decline, and therefore, as I said in my little presentation before, the active population became relatively larger, the young dependents became relatively less, and therefore the ratio between the active and the dependents start to become very favorable. That's about 2 to 1. Nonetheless, it's an interesting intellectual question, because it might be, I'm just not sure, but it might be that the East Asian countries, they have captured demographic dividends without knowing that they were capturing a demographic dividend, because they did a lot of policies, savings, investment in education, extremely important, subsidizing industries and export. They have done a lot of these policies. But the concept of the demographic dividend, I call it an ex post concept. It's a concept which was created after the fact and after people start to understand what took place in East Asia. Now the big question is whether we can replicate these demographic dividends in other parts of the world. Not only in Maldives, but also and mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, which still has a very high fertility at about 5 children per woman on average for sub-Saharan Africa. And to replicate the demographic dividends, I think you need a couple of things to be, many more than a couple of things, several things to be in place. As I showed on the little graph of the Population Reference Bureau, these little cogs, you need to have education policies. unless you have that. You need to have health policies, you need to have gender policies, you need to have governance, you need to have good economic policies. But before we can put all these policies in place, you need first to have a sharp reduction in fertility. That box for Maldives we can tick, it's done. You have now 2.5 children per woman. You are at the end of the demographic transition. You have done this demographic modernization transformation, but now the time has come to put all these other little cogs together, and they have started to work. And again, it's education, health, governance, and economic policies. And this was highlighted in a book report I mentioned in the references here by colleagues Gribble and Bremner at the Population Reference Bureau. And they invented this graph with the little cogs, and it's used now all over the world. And they insisted on these right policies, the policy climate, the public policies. Now, for that to happen, and this is an excellent question you ask, I think there must be an awareness among the leadership. And very often leaders don't have time to read even these short reports. They have half an hour, you know, I remember I met some head of states in other parts of the world, and I had 30 minutes to explain everything about demography. And you know, I'm trying to do that in 45 hours with my students at Georgetown, and I don't succeed. So how can you do it in 30 minutes? But you have to try. And so you have to bring some key concepts and to really make them aware that this is important, and this has far-reaching consequences. This can be done, the policies can be put in place, because a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't do anything on population, you cannot do anything, it's complicated, takes time. That's not correct. You can act on population trends, and you can do it with some degree of efficiency, and you can do it within the framework of human rights. So it's quite important. So to get back to all these policies, you know, I'm turning to the Minister of Education. This is the most important portfolio in a country like this one, because you are going to craft the new generation of productive people, of achievers, of people who will contribute to the famous economic surplus I was mentioning. But it's not the only sector, you know, it has to be done with health, has to be done with economic policies, has to be done with accountability and solid monitoring and evaluation. And on that count, I think the NBS is collecting more data, still analyzing the data you have. There is a report coming up soon on the youth, and there will be projections also coming up for this country. It's not easy to do, but this will be done. So I think there is a lot of things going on. This is a beginning of a process to have a new conversation on population and development. Thank you.
I think we have a question from the audience. If you could have the microphone over there. I think we might have a couple, so we'll take a couple of questions from the audience before we go back to my questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, I think.
Almost.
Yeah. I'm Sharbin from Maldives Red Crescent, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for the very insightful and knowledgeable discussion as well. Also, I would like to use this opportunity to ask two questions, if I may. First one is one key statistic that jumped at me, but wasn't surprising from Professor's presentation, was the population density. 1,300 people per square per kilometer. So I would like to ask, how does this factor into you maximizing the population or dynamics, demographic dividend, and also how does this factor in with the aging population as well? My second question is, I just quickly Googled and saw that the unemployment rate in Maldives increased from 11.3 in 2013 to 11.6 in 2014. So how does the large 47.5% of employable population factor in with this? Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for these two questions. I will try to deal with the first one, and then maybe my colleagues could deal with the employment question. You know, this country is about 90,000 square kilometers, very large, 3 times the size of Belgium, just to give an idea. And there are 1,200 islands, and all the emerged lands represent about 1/3 of 1% of the whole country. So it's about 0.3% of the whole area of the country. This is emerged lands. So there's no surprise that we have very high population densities. Of course, this concept of population density might be skewed or biased because we have here in this capital city a very, very, very high population density. The island of Malé is about, some people say less than 2 square kilometers, some people say 2.2 square kilometers. I haven't done the calculation myself, I must confess, but the population is roughly 140,000, maybe 150,000 on a very, very small piece of land. So you have probably, and we haven't checked with Hong Kong and other places, but we have probably the highest urban population density in the world in this very place of Malé. Now there are, as you mentioned, I think you alluded to some migration movements, and there is a consolidation policy which was adopted by the government some time ago, and there would be the goal would be to bring more people on, I think, Ulu Malé, and there is also a bridge going to connect Malé and the airport. So there will be, I think, a vision to have even a larger urban population, if you will, on these different islands, Ulu Malé, Ulule, Vilingili, and Malé, if I am correct. And that would bring about, you know, and it's mentioned in the policy documents, about 70% of the total population of the country, which is quite impressive. And now, on the other hand, the government would like to have some regional poles of development on some islands, and then there will be a kind of consolidation, that's the word being used here, concentration could be another word, of population in more viable entities, if you will. Now, when I came first here, I was joined by my wife because she wanted to see the Maldives, and we went to some atolls outside, and we visited some islands, and it's difficult to provide services to all islands. You have to provide electricity, clean water, you have to provide a school and a health center. And so we stayed on one island in Digura, and we visited all school and health centers, etc. And we talked to the service providers who very often come from outside the country, like a physician come from India, etc. And they need a translator because they don't speak Dhivehi, and so it's quite difficult. So I think there is some rationale to have consolidation of the population in growth center, because you need critical mass for the economy, etc. But it's difficult also to put into place. There are some experience with the transmigration policies in Indonesia. It's not that easy to do, but it's doable. So I just want to put a little bit of caution because some of these policies are difficult to implement. Now, with respect to the second question, which is the employment, I would like to turn to my dear NBS colleague, Chief Statistician at NBS. Thank you.
Thank you. For the employment, I think you were referring to the youth unemployment data, yeah? So, we have find even in the previous censuses we have high unemployment for the youth, and some of the reasons that we have posed a question in the census asking why they were not getting employment. So, like the youth, high proportion of these youth are still studying also, and then we find that the women there is not they are too much engaged, spending too much time in the housework, and so there is a high proportion of our population that are not in the labor force also. So, like one aspect is we need to create the employment opportunities for the people who are unemployed and who are seeking work. So, in the unemployment, when we consider it, it is like if you are looking for work and then if you are like available for work. So, these two conditions have to be met for the person to be unemployed. So, it is a good thing in one way that people are looking for work, they are available for work, but the sad thing is that we are not able to create these job opportunities in the country. And then one aspect is we have a high proportion of population, especially women, still out of the labor force. So, I think labor market issues is very complicated, but we need to not think so much about jobs as such as something like the government jobs or what is available in the private sector, but rather try to become more entrepreneurial and then try to do something even on our own. If we are engaged in economic activity, income generating activity, even for 1 hour during our reference period, like a 1 week time, the person is considered as employed. So, like there are lots of things I think the youth, our generation can try to, try to become more self-employed, I think, rather than too much focusing on the getting these jobs. So, there are a lot of issues in the labor market, and then how we can tap is to try and create the jobs and also to try and focus more on creating the facilities like child care facilities and these things for the women, labor force participation. We have only half the women actually in the labor force even in the country. So, there is these barriers, so all these things, the right policies I think has to be in place to try and take advantage of this working age population that we have. Thank you.
To add something? No? Okay. Any other? We've got a question.
Thank you. I'm Shihab from MNU, and my question is regarding just what has been discussed about population consolidation. What would be the trend or the future growth of the population if we are working towards this population consolidation? Concentration, because we could see our policy makers are now going towards population consolidation area. So, in the perspectives of population, let's say, would it be a positive change for the growth of the population? Since I got this question because as we are talking about the window for our growth or development, currently we are having, but if we go on ahead, this window would pass and we may have an aging population. So, what would be the consequences of this? Would it be a positive change or negative change to the population of Maldives in the future? What would be the expert opinion to policy makers on this regard? Thank you.
Professor.
Yeah, that's an excellent question again. I think I discussed in the report, we discussed the consolidation policies. We also discussed the policy process in Maldives, because there was a population policy in 2004 which has not been used much since. And then we look at the development plans, and they have not been used as well. And then we looked at the election manifestos and also some of the speeches of the presidents, which we try to read and understand and put this policy process, to try to understand the policy process. So today, this consolidation policy, I think that's a goal, but it has to come with the jobs. And I think the key issue is that, as I used to say, there are three key issues. One is jobs, the second one is jobs, and the third one is jobs. And if we have 100,000 people on Ulu Malé, and I went to visit the island actually last time, you see high rises and a lot of urban development, reclaimed land, etc. You have to bring along job opportunities for these people, because they have to make a living. They cannot make a traditional way of living, being on the islands and going fishing and doing a bit of agriculture, which is kind of limited because of soil issues, etc., and the climate. But you have to find jobs. And I think when you look at the documents, and we have been going through a lot of documents, including promotional documents when Maldives is trying to go to business fairs in Singapore and in other places. I think the idea is also to bring new job opportunities and to bring new industries and to bring new things to do. And it's not easy. Again, if you look at the World Bank documents or the IMF documents, the job creation is one of the most complex things, because you need investment, you need to find a niche in the market, and all that is quite complex. So I am, going back again to education, because I think one of the challenges in the future will be to match the education curriculum or curricula with the need of the economy. What we want to do in this report actually is to really flag those issues. We don't pretend to have all the answers, and the answers are to be found by Maldivians. And in this country, there is no one size fits them all. There is no silver bullet, as we say. Those decisions and policy have to be crafted, but they have what needs to be done, and that's, I think, what we try to convey and to stress in this report, is that we need to bring all these sectors together. It's not just education, it's not just foreign investment, it's not just tourism, it's not just land reclamation or consolidation policy. It's to bring all this together in a framework which is also doing a lot of interesting developments. One is, for instance, the sex ratio at birth. It's about 108 boys born for 100 girls, and that has been confirmed by the data of the vital statistics. So there is a fertility which is quite low, although we don't know exactly why is it so low. That's an interesting issue. And so more analysis is needed, more data are coming, and so we hope we have this ongoing discussion in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but there's still a question that we got from Twitter, and I'd like to pose this to Alan. The question is, what are some of the innovative ways that an island like Maldives can engage in consultative policy formulation?
Fantastic. I was actually hoping this question would come up. It was going to be my closing statement, so I'm trying to really help you with the time. Yes. So you see, in the UN, we're used to making lofty statements and invent new slogans and all of that. So I've invented one over the last days. I've introduced it in Sri Lanka already, and I'm going to introduce it now to you so you can all tweet and send the messages around. So if we are able to link the demographic dividend to the digital dividend, that for me is the solution. Because you have half of the population that is less than 25 years old. I'm pretty sure that most of that population is somehow connected to some digital device. Looking at the audience, I can see that my hypothesis is confirmed. No, but seriously, this is exactly where the innovation lies, because, and I always apologize that it is not personal what I'm saying against demographers or statisticians, but we have to look at data beyond statistics and beyond demography. Because as the professor said, and I think you said it as well, madam, is that these statistics and these demographic projections and graphs are not always understood, or they're not even read by politicians or by policymakers or decision makers. So to get past that, I think it's very important that we look into the digital divide and what the digital revolution can give us. So whether it is a cloud-based platform, whether it is an electronic forum or electronic fora like this, where you have contributions from each and everyone on what they see, so that the data is also academic research, but it's human interest stories, it's blogs, it's what people see and perceive as the changing patterns in their lives, and how that contributes to policy making, and create those dialogues. And it doesn't have to be a face-to-face dialogue. And I think this is really very important because, and that takes me to the accountability thing, the accountability aspect, that a lot of countries in the world have e-governance.
Thank you very much. And I think I'll just allow each one of the panelists to say something in closing before we conclude the discussion. Shahda?
Thank you. I would just like to start from where Alan finished. So I would like to say that he has actually hit the nail on the head or something like that, that we are talking about data revolution. Right now we are talking about these sustainable development goals, where you have economic, social and environmental aspects has to be integrated in the development agenda. And we have this 2030 agenda, where you have all these 17 goals, 169 indicators and targets and 231 indicators. So the statistical community is now talking about how can a National Statistical Office do it on its own. So there is all this on private sector, on the citizens, on new and innovative ways of collecting the data, using what is available in the digitally. And so right now I think the young population, it's a very interesting time to think of these new innovative ways of analyzing data, collecting data, and then now we are, the generation is, it's like time for data scientists. That's what we are talking about in the statistical community. So with that, I think, I hope we see more people analyzing data, more research being done, and more stories being told by the population using the statistics. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to conclude by saying that this is an absolutely unique place on Earth. It's absolutely fascinating to see and to decipher the demography and the economic evolution of this country. I have tried to do so in collaboration with the NBS, but I don't think we want to stop here. We want to just start this conversation, and I will make sure when I am back in the US that we keep working together. We try to post blogs on Population Reference Bureau website, and to have some publications, and to really make the story known around the world, that you know, because a lot of people don't know much about the demographic evolution in this country. You see the headlines, you know, it's a tourist destination, but there are a lot of other things and a lot of other challenges that we need to be aware of, and we need to prepare ourselves to address the future challenge. So that would be my concluding word. It's a bit an humbling experience as well, because the more you discover a country, the more you see complexities and the culture, and this is again a very unique place. And I think we were discussing last night, it's a small population, and it has its own writing, it has its own alphabets. It's quite unique. You know, you cannot say that of any other group of 400,000 people. So thank you very much. This is an honor and privilege for me to be here.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the panel discussion. Our hope really is that we move this conversation forward. Our hope is that there is a more insistence in understanding the statistics to drive or to plan the future of this country. We hope that there will be a marriage between the statistics and the policies that are formulated for the development of Maldives. And we hope that you as young people will continue this conversation, that you will be engaged in this conversation to carry these information to the policymakers, to make the policymakers hear what is important for you. We've had so many significant issues about the population, about the current trends, and I know you all have questions that you've wanted to ask, and I've had questions that I wanted to ask, but we unfortunately don't have the time today. But this is just the beginning, and this conversation will keep going. Keep those tweets about this coming, and be engaged in, as Ellen said, within the dimension of technology and the social media. Talk about this, have discussions about this, and make policymakers understand how important this is for the future of the country. Thank you very much for our panelists, Ellen, Shahda, Professor May. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for hearing this discussion and engaging with us during this 1 hour. But we still have a small item in the agenda before we conclude. But please give a big round of applause to our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
As part of the Population Day, we are launching the census quiz, and as a young Maldivian, I would like to use this opportunity to ask as many people as possible to take part in this quiz, especially the youth. And I would like to thank Uridu for helping us make this quiz. Thank you.
And I think that concludes the events for today. Let me thank the Honourable Minister of Education for being here with us today, and also the Honourable Minister of Finance and all the guests who are here today to listen to this conversation. And we sincerely hope that the conversation we've had is something that will move forward and will form part of policies that determine our very future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here, and I wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you. And we also have some goodie bags over there from UNFPA, which are complimentary. So please feel free to take some on your way out. Thank you.